Edia, a fantasy adventure podcast. Chapter 1. The Sins of the Father. David's father's hand swept across his face, knocking his son to the floor.
You idiot! I told you to stack the bloody firewood before you went to bed last night.
David looked shamefully upwards, towards his father from the floor, a trickle of blood leaving the fresh wound on his cheek.
Well, answer me, boy.
I don't remember, sir.
Oh, you don't remember.
David's father kicked his fallen child in the ribs. David rolled over in agony and cried.
Get up!
David didn't respond.
I said get up. Men do not cry.
David staggered up and propped himself up against the wall. He looked into his father's rage-filled eyes.
I think you're testing me, son. I think you're trying my patience.
David could only look at his father when he acted like this.
I think you want to see how far you can push your old man. You want to actually see if I'll follow through with it when I say I'll kill you after you do something stupid. Is that it?
David didn't respond. His father stepped over towards him and grabbed David by his shirt collar and pushed him up against the wall of their tiny home.
Listen, son, I ain't your mama, and I ain't gonna pamper you, and I ain't gonna baby you. Is that clear, David?
David knew that, even though it was wise to remain silent whilst his father was speaking, it would be even wiser to answer him when he asked a question. Yes. David's father punched him in the stomach. David leapt off the floor in pain. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's more like it.
David's father looked around the room. The table was overturned and the ashes from the hearth had poured out into the rest of the room.
Clean this filth up before I return from the market. It better be cleaner than the crown of the king by the time I get back, or so help me, David. I'll kill you.
David's father left without another word. David lowered himself to the floor, pulled his knees up to his chest, and wept. This was life as usual for David, though, unlike any other recurring pain, calluses never formed from the wounds, both physical and emotional, his father left on him. Being only 16 years old, David did not yet have the strength to confront his father. It had always been like this, though, and he didn't see it changing anytime soon. When David was very young, his mother died. David was only around the age of 5, so he didn't remember much about his mother, only that she had fair, blonde, almost white hair, and a beautiful smile below her lush blue eyes. She was, without a doubt, David's favorite memory. Back when she was alive, his father was a kinder man too. They lived in a small village north of Ahon Forest called Sageton. There his father, Brucius, worked as a lumberjack. He made average wages, but they were happy as a family. On an unexpected morning, however, David's mother, her name was Elena, simply did not wake up. She died in her sleep. There was a mediocre funeral for her. Only David, Brucius, and 2 or 3 of Elena's closest friends attended the burial. Her plot was dug in the local cemetery on the northern edge of town, marked with a mossy stone. After that day, Brucius became a different man. Without his wife, he had nothing to live for. He began spending his mornings sleeping on the floor, his afternoons working in the forest, and his evenings drinking at the pub, often staggering home after midnight. David would have to assist his father to bed, but in his drunkenness, he'd always manage to fall out of his bed during the night and spend the rest of his sleep on the floor, only to repeat it all the next day, and the day following, and the day after that. David hated his father. He knew in his heart it was wrong to hate the man who was his father, but deep down, a fire of hatred burned for that man. He often thought of running away or finding some way to get him thrown into prison, or even to have him killed. These evil thoughts frightened David, but still, they were there, deep in his mind. The sun was setting when David finally got the house clean. Time to start dinner now. He got a pan from the cupboard and some oil from the counter. He put a thin layer of oil on the pan and walked over to the hearth and stoked it a bit. Setting the pan on the iron rack over the fire, David added another log to the flame. He then retrieved a cut of salted pork from the meat box and cut it into strips. He placed the bacon strips in the pan and cooked them until they were crispy and brown. He took them out of the pan and divided them into 2 plates. His father, of course, would receive the dish with more bacon. After that, he retrieved 2 eggs from the egg crate and cracked them over the same hot pan. Using a wooden spoon, he scrambled the eggs and added some salt, pepper, and other spices to it. Once those were complete, he scooped them out of the pan and put them onto the plates. After that, he took 3 slices of bread and brought them over to the fire. He removed the pan and set it aside for washing later. He placed the 3 slices of bread directly on the iron rack above the fire and waited for them to toast. Once they were completed, he removed them and placed 2 neatly on his father's plate and 1 on his. He washed the pan in the outdoor basin and put it away. Finally, he poured himself a glass of water and his father a glass of ale and set up their dinner at the table. David was impressed with himself on how fine a job he did preparing this meal. He sat at the table and watched out the window. It grew dark outside, so David lit a candle to lighten up the room. When he did so, his father pushed open their wooden front door. To David's surprise, not smelling of beer or rum, and not in the least bit drunk.
"I smell dinner,"
Brucius, his father, said. He sat down as David spoke. "I made bacon, eggs, and toast, Father." Brucius looked at his plate and looked at David. His son grinned at him as he began to eat his dinner. Brucius did not smile, however. He looked down at the dinner his son prepared for him and picked up the dish with his hands. In one swift motion, he launched the plate across the room. It smashed against David's face, pieces of broken ceramic and bits of food splintering everywhere. David yelped as his face bled.
"You idiot,"
his father exclaimed.
"Don't you know the difference between breakfast and supper? You really have no sense at all, do you, boy?"
David began to cry as he held his face.
"Don't you dare give me that, you pussycat,"
his father screamed, standing up from the table.
"You are worthless! Worthless! You really will never amount to anything, will you, boy?"
David quivered in his chair at the table. Brucius was furious now.
"So help me, David, answer your father."
David could bear it no longer. He stood up from the table and ran out the front door. As he dashed through the darkness of Sageton at night, he could hear the galloping of his father's feet behind him. He screamed as he pursued his son.
"David! David, you get your sorry self back here!"
David did not comply, though. He kept running. After reaching the center of town, he looked behind him over his shoulder to see if his father was still pursuing him. He saw no sign of Brucius. Suddenly, however, he ran into someone, a man, and fell straight to the ground. He looked up and saw a monk standing over him.
"Bless you, son. What are you running from?"
The kind monk asked him. "Please, brother, you've got to help me."
"Quickly," the monk said. "Follow me."
The monk led David across the town. Some homes were dark and some were lit up by torchlight. The town was not nearly as busy at night as it was during the day. The people had gone home to go to sleep or be with their families. Even the animals were sleeping in their barns or sties. David looked up as he ran with the monk. The stars were shining over the humble little town. The monk led David to a very tall stone, tower-shaped building near the western edge of the town. He had never seen this building before and was surprised at its enormous size and stonework. "Where are we?"
"This is the shrine of Lord Emmendale, of course. Have you never been here?"
"No," David said as they approached the tower. The monk pulled from his pocket a key and unlocked the door to the shrine. Then he pushed open the door. David hurried inside and closed it behind them. Inside, the shrine was pitch black. Fear and anxiety took over David, and he began to shake with chills. Suddenly, a light blinded David, and a striking noise echoed off the stone walls. The monk had lit a torch, which was now mounted on the wall and flickering. David's eyes adjusted to the light, and he looked around the shrine. It was an amazing sight. He and the monk were standing on a balcony overlooking a vast temple lined with columns and statues of cherubim. The building was shingled with lovely stones, and in the center of it all was a statue of a man.
"You'll be safe here for now, son."
"This is incredible," David said, practically unable to let his words out.
"I can't believe you've never been here before,"
the monk replied. "Who is that man in the middle of the temple, down below?" The monk was taken aback by this question. He chuckled and looked down at David.
"Surely you're joking, right, young man?"
David just stared at him.
"My goodness, wow," the monk said. Well, you better take a seat, son. This is not a short bedtime story. This is a great, great legend. This is the story, the legend of Lord Emmendale and of Edea itself."
Thank you for listening to Edea, a fantasy adventure podcast. That's all for now, but if you'd like to stay up to date with everything Edea, be sure to visit our website, edeapodcast.com. Edea is funded and supported entirely by patrons through Patreon. If you'd like to become a supporter of Edea, be sure to join us there, where you can find exclusive access to images, updates, maps, videos, and all sorts of other cool stuff. You can also follow us on Twitter and YouTube. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep moving forward and looking upward.